Hello and welcome back to another video of the Brainy Heart. In this video, we'll be talking about the cerebellum. In this video, we'll be talking about the functions of the cerebellum, and we'll also be talking about the structure and anatomy of the cerebellum. So let's get right into it. To start off, your cerebellum can be found posterior to your brainstem and inferior to your cerebrum. The cerebrum and cerebellum are separated by the tentorium cerebelli. The tentorium cerebelli is an extension of the dura mater, and it means the tent of the cerebellum in Latin. If you want to learn more about the tentorium cerebelli and the dura mater as a whole, check out my video about the dura mater here. Coming back to the cerebellum, here I have a very rough drawing of the brainstem and the cerebellum. As you can see, you have your midbrain over here, your pons, and your medulla, and you have your cerebellum over here. And the cerebellum's kind of exaggerated, and I made it a little bigger so that you guys can see it, but this might not be the exact scale drawing of a real brainstem and cerebellum. This is just a rough drawing. Anyways, the cerebellum is very similar to the cerebrum. Hence, it's called the little brain. The cerebellum, just like the cerebrum, is very rough and bumpy. The cerebellum has a lot of sulci or fissures running parallelly to each other on the surface. And the cerebellum is connected to the brainstem by three peduncles. And the connection between the cerebellum and brainstem is very important because the cerebellum might have to send signals to different parts of the body through the brainstem. Or even if it has to send a signal to the brain, it might have to use the brainstem. So these peduncles are very important. If we look at the cerebellum from a sagittal view, so a cut down the middle from up to down, and if we look at the cerebrum in that way, inside you'll have something that looks like a tree, and it has a lot of branches branching off. And this tree-looking structure is actually called the arbor vitae, and this is Latin for tree of life. The rough and bumpy outside surface will look something like this on the inside, and this is a very, very rough drawing, so please do not take this for granted. If you want to get a really accurate picture, you might want to search it up on Google, as this is a very rough drawing just for the sake of teaching the basics of the cerebellum. So your cerebellum also has lobes, just like your cerebrum. So over here, I have a redrawn picture of the cerebellum and the brainstem. And like I said, I've made the cerebrum into a different shape just for the sake of teaching it. This is not the exact shape of a cerebellum. I'm just using this to enlarge the cerebellum to show the different lobes. Now, the lobes might be divided something like this. This is lobe number 1, then you got lobe number 2, then you got lobe number 3 over here in the middle. So the first lobe is the anterior lobe, and then we have the posterior in the middle, and finally we have the flocculonodule lobe. Just like your spinal cord has these different vertebrae, your cerebellum has different lobules within the lobes. So your anterior lobe has about 5 lobules, your posterior lobe has about 4 lobules, and your flocula, or your flocculonodular lobe, has 1 lobule. So overall, there are 10 lobules in your cerebellum. And just like the vertebrae, each lobule takes care of a certain thing. And your lobes also have different functions. But before I talk about the functions, I want to finish talking about the anatomy. So over on the left, I have a picture of the cerebellum, but now we're looking at the cerebellum from the back. So just like your cerebrum is split into 2 hemispheres, your cerebellum also is split into the left and right hemisphere. And just like your cerebrum has this midline called the sagittal sulcus, your cerebellum has a midline splitting the 2 hemispheres, And this midline is called the vermis. So this in the middle is the vermis. The area around the vermis is called the paravermal zone or the intermediate zone of the cerebellum. So I'll be calling this zone as the intermediate zone for this video, but you can call this the paravermal zone if you would like to. Then finally, we have the lateral sides of the cerebellum. So that is how your cerebellum is split into. And if you want to look at the lobes from the back side, say you got your anterior over there, and then you have the posterior over here, and the flocculonodular lobe is actually underneath the cerebellum, this green area, and it's kind of hard to see it from the back. So that was the basic overview of the cerebellum's anatomy. Now let's talk about its functions and the different functions of these different parts that I've been talking about. So now let's talk about the function of the cerebellum. Your cerebellum's main function is motor activity. It takes care of number 1, the tone of the muscles, number 2, the coordination, and number 3, the balance and posture. Although these lobes in the cerebellum will have a lot of mixed functions, the tone of the muscles is normally the main function of the anterior lobe, and the main function of the posterior lobe is coordination. And the final lobe, which is the flocculonodular lobe, takes care of the balance and posture. Now hold on to that for a little while. Now I want to talk about these different sections that I previously discussed in this video. So like I said, we have the vermis, we have the intermediate zone, and the lateral sides. Your vermis takes care of all the muscles on the midline of the body. So your nose, your eyes, your mouth, and the intermediate zones take care of your 4 limbs. And the lateral sides are involved in more of planning and learning. So that's what those sections are there for. So one way you can remember this is by drawing yourself a pretty little image over here. And this middle area is the middle of the body, and then these 4 lines coming out are the limbs. And as you can see, the limbs are on the intermediate zone, and then the body, it's the middle of the body, is on the vermis. So you can draw yourself a stick figure, and coming back to the tone, coordination, and balance, let's say are helping your friend move out, and you go and he's got all his boxes taped up, and there's this one box, and then there is another box right next to this, and you go up to pick up this box, and your friend warns you, saying that that box is like 20 pounds and it's gonna be really heavy, so be careful. And you go up, all your muscles are ready to perform, and they're all tensed up and getting prepared to lift this really heavy box. And when you walk over and you lift it, it's empty. Your friend has made a mistake, and he accidentally told you that this was the heavy box, while this was the actual heavy box. You're going to be pulling really hard to pick that box up because it's a 20-pound box. But then when you realize that it's empty, your body's going to flip backwards because you put so much pressure on a very small thing. Cerebellum realizes that the box is actually empty, so your sensory information travels from your muscles to your cerebellum, and the cerebellum then sends out the motor information telling the muscles to relax, and and then the muscles relax, causing you not to flip backwards. So we can put this into 3 different steps. The first thing that happens when your cerebrum sends out this motor information telling your muscles to prepare, your cerebellum gets motor plans. These motor plans are nothing but a plan of what's going to be happening. So your motor cortex, which is somewhere over here, sends the motor information to the limbs, to your brainstem, and then a sensation happens, it crosses over, then goes into your spinal cord, and then your spinal cord sends it to the muscles of your hand. And then you realize the box is empty. That sends you information. It's gonna be coming back into the spinal cord, and then into the brainstem, crosses over, and then into the cerebellum. And then the cerebellum does its calculations, taking in the motor plan and the sensory information, does its calculations, and then it sends out the motor activity, so the feedback. And the way the cerebellum sends back the feedback is kind of complicated. So it has the motor information ready with the revised plan of what the muscles should do. It sends it to the motor cortex. The motor cortex sends it down to the brainstem. Then it crosses over, and also the basal ganglia is involved in this, but I'm not going to be talking about the basal ganglia in this video, as that is a topic for another video. From the motor cortex, it goes down into the brainstem. The decussation happens, it crosses over, then it goes down into the spinal cord, into your muscles, telling your muscles to relax so that you don't flip backwards. This is one of many examples where your cerebrum makes the wrong decision of telling your body what to do, and then your cerebrum makes these activities more refined and better, more smooth. Person with damage in the cerebrum, person with a damage in the cerebellum, might have difficulty walking steadily. They might look like a drunk person to walk. And sometimes studies have found that if your cerebrum is damaged, then you might have difficulty speaking. This is because the lobules number 5, 6, and 7, which are in your anterior, and then 6 and 7 are in your posterior, control the 150 muscles that you speak. So if there is a damage in this area, so I would say around here, then you might suffer from not being able to speak. And that's just an overview of the brainstem's anatomy and physiology. That was it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned from it. I'm always open to comments, questions, and or suggestions. Also, check out my blog at brainyhearts.wordpress.com. This is the Brainy Heart signing off. I'll catch you later in the next one.